Today I want to talk about environmental mitigation. So let's lay out some ground rules first. When considering environmental mitigation, there is a few things that we need to understand. As you would probably guess, I'm using environmental mitigation to define climate change. There's a reason for that, and I'll make that clear later on if you pay attention. So, the environment is basically indestructible. Unless somebody like, say, the current president of the United States or Stephen Miller decides to spend the $27 trillion per ounce for antimatter, we currently don't have the technology to destroy planet Earth. And by that, I mean turn it into an asteroid. We can't break up the planet into a billion little pieces quite yet. Barring, say, Tom Homan spending $27 trillion per ounce for antimatter to do that. Right? So the environment is essentially indestructible. So now we go to the question of global warming. For those of you that believe in global warming, for those of you that don't, I'll address you shortly. I have other things to tell you which by no means are judging you, right? So I'm going to back your belief in a way that you don't expect. Just stay with me for this. So, for those of you that believe in climate change, it's not us, right? So you and I, no matter how many road trips we take, no matter how many times we burn tires in our backyard, we are not affecting the environment. The people that are affecting the environment are major corporations. So I'm talking about, like, say, Dow Corning. I'm talking about Lockheed. I'm talking about Northrop Grumman. I'm talking about Samsung. I'm talking about, say, Intel, any chemical production company. Their emissions by far and away exceed what any of us are capable of producing. So environmental change, that global warming, it's not us. We're not doing it. Global warming is being done on an industrial scale by major industry. And there's nothing that we can do to change that. With that said, there are mitigation tactics that we currently have that we'll absolutely refuse to use. We're not going to use these mitigation tactics because there's no political will. What I'm hoping to do with this specific video is to change that, to add political will. So for right now, we've gone 3 separate routes to mitigate environment change, none of which will work. None of them are going to work. We decided that we were going to try recycling first because recycling doesn't require us to change behavior. Recycling doesn't require us a terrible amount of inconvenience. I mean, here's the problem with recycling. Recycling only works if there's a market for post-consumer materials. And there hasn't been. There never was. Quite frankly, at this point, 30 years, 40 years later, I don't foresee a market for post-consumer materials. And I don't think you should either. I mean, we can go around and say, hey, no, we need to start using more post-consumer materials. But we haven't yet. And I don't think we're going to moving forward either. Then we went the other route. We said, all right, so the problem is actually industry. So let's look at industry and see what we can do to offset. So we did a carbon tax. And then we gave industry a way out. So now we're doing a carbon tax with carbon credits. So a whole lot of companies pay a whole lot of companies like Tesla. You pay companies to plant trees. You don't require that they show that they're planting trees. The logic being, oh, well, we'll see if the trees are being planted. No, we won't. We cut down 3 acres of trees and plant 5 trees, the carbon credit is made. Done. That's not helping anybody. We charge a carbon tax. Oh, I'm just going to pay Tesla. The carbon tax is offset by my carbon credit. So I'm going to deduct my carbon tax to make money on my carbon tax. And at the same time, that carbon credit was that carbon tax I paid to Tesla instead of paying it to the government. So the government can't use that money. And technically, I don't lose it anyway because the government pays me the money that I paid to Tesla. And in the meantime, none of us consider that in the production of those microchips and batteries and battery components that Tesla has to make in order to produce its cars, we have an equal amount of carbon emissions as we would if we never used electrical vehicles in the first place. Right? So I understand that a lot of people don't want to believe this, but go ahead and take a look at the data. And you'll see the data supports what I'm saying. Over the life of a car, so if you keep your car for 250,000 miles, the amount of carbon emissions that you produce over that 250,000 miles is equivalent to the carbon emissions that a brand new electrical vehicle produces at 0 miles. Now the electric vehicle doesn't produce any emissions after that point. But once it comes off the assembly line, the carbon emissions are approximately the same. And intuitively, if you understand your chemistry and the way we dispose of chemicals, intuitively that actually does make sense. But if you're unhappy with the fact, or you're unhappy with the presentation of the fact, by all means, review the data. The data will show that that's essentially true. It's basically factual. There's no difference in emissions. Okay? So currently, the way we're doing it, we're not mitigating environmental problems at all. We're not doing anything to mitigate environmental issues. What can we do to change that? Well, I read a study about, maybe 8 years back. And again, about 6 years back, another study. And then again, another study. Maybe 4 years back, and again, another study. Long and short, I've read about, maybe 24 studies that imply that roughly 80% of atmospheric carbon is trapped by marine snow. What's marine snow? Well, marine snow is essentially marine life. It's diatoms, it's single-cell algae, it's krill, it's that tiny, tiny shrimp. Not the ones that we eat, they're too small for us, but they get caught in the baleen of whales, sponges eat them, that kind of thing. Jellyfish. That being the case, instead of paying money to Tesla, why not, through legislation, require a company like, say, Atafina, or DuPont, or Bayer, pharmaceutical company, companies that produce large amounts of carbon emissions. Why not require these companies to farm phytoplankton? Alright, so that's fine. You're emitting mass amounts of carbon. You have to build phytoplankton farms. So now a company like DuPont has several farms, not just one, not just two, where they're producing hundreds of billions or trillions of tons of marine snow. They're farming that type of life that goes into the ocean, that in turn grows keratin shells, because that's their evolutionary tool to evade predation. They grow the keratin shells. Those keratin shells are made of carbon. That carbon has to come from somewhere. It's going to come from the atmospheric carbon. They release all of that into the ocean when they become mature, and then we start watching that oceanic cycle occur, right? The amount of food for those bottom feeders, it increases. So you have more urchins, you have more sea slugs, you have more sponges. And as that increases, the animals that feed on them have greater population because they're no longer in a famine cycle. Currently, they're in a famine cycle, which is why we're losing the oceanic biodiversity. So you're actually doing three things by doing this. One is you're pulling carbon out of the atmosphere at a much faster rate. Additionally, on land, we can say, okay, DuPont, Dow Corning, Monsanto, Antofina, Chevron, Esso, Exxon, you guys have to plant forests. And we put the fee for building forests onto them as well. So they're responsible for planting those forests. And they have to show documentation. And they have to show trees. They have to show plankton growth. They have to show that release into the ocean. So we're making them prove that they're actually doing these things. We're placing the burden of proof as well as the obligation on to industry to do these things. Because industry is the largest polluter. They're creating all the pollution. Make them undo it. Right? It doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. We don't need a new tax for that. That's just a new bill that industry has to pay. Are they going to pass it off to the consumer? Absolutely, they're going to pass it off to the consumer. Now, I've thought about solutions for that too. That's for another video. For this video, I just want to talk about environmental mitigation. So now we've got them producing the phytoplankton. We've got them planting the trees. We have them producing fungus farms because you can't have trees without the fungus. It's been shown over and over. Again, lots and lots of studies. Please, I encourage you to look them up. Any university website is going to have the studies. So any university website where they're talking about the biology of trees, you can find those papers. And they'll show the trees coexist with a fungus. Trees give the fungus sugar. The fungus gives the trees carbon dioxide. And that's how they pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So now we have 5 different prongs that we're using to literally suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. A caveat, which I'll get to later, it's about the amount of oxygen that we're going to end up producing. Because overproduction of oxygen is bad, and I'll explain how later. More accurately, I'm going to point you to PBS Eons and have you watch their video on that time that the Earth caught fire for 2 million years or something like that. But it was just this great little video about how an excess of oxygen in the atmosphere created a time when life couldn't exist because the atmosphere was quite literally on fire. Too much oxygen in the atmosphere could allow that to happen again. But back to the point about how much carbon dioxide we're sucking out of the atmosphere. An on-land approach, a by-sea approach, the by-sea approach is going to increase the biodiversity. With that increase in biodiversity, for those of you who don't understand how that biodiversity is going to increase, as the current populations increase, they have a niche. They're not going to go outside their niche, which means that the larger populations, they're going to have to develop into these new niches. When they develop into the new niches, you're going to realize that they actually have species change. New species will emerge out of the existing species to fill these new ecological niches. With the current ecological niches that exist, we're going to reverse the bleaching of the coral. I suspect. I am not an expert. What I'm doing is parenting. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Let me say it correctly. What I'm doing is parroting the scientific papers that I've read and the scientific lectures that I've listened to. So what happens is when you produce these new niches, new species are going to grow. They're going to move in. The old species are going to expand, and then they're going to specialize to limit competition. As they specialize, they're going to develop new species. Now, I suspect what's going to happen is the bottom feeders populations are going to increase. The sponge populations are going to increase. You're going to have new animals come out. You're going to have the reversal of the coral bleaching. You're going to have more oxygen in the water, which will in turn kickstart the current cycle, which means that we're going to reverse the ice melting on the caps because the colder water is going to get pushed to the poles. And as that colder water gets pushed to the poles, it's going to freeze. Colder water is not only uses less volume than warmer water, but it compresses. Once it compresses, it's going to turn into ice. You're going to redevelop the caps. You redevelop the caps, you're going to have more fauna and more flora. The equator is going to warm up. When the equator warms up, you're going to have greater floral biodiversity. You see what's happening here. We're bringing new species in. Is it possible that we're going to have Lazarus species? Yes, it's entirely possible we'll have Lazarus species. But what I suspect is the existing flora-fauna population is going to specialize. And it's going to specialize to the point to where they break off and create new species within their master species. And soon they'll be able to fill in all of the new ecological niches that we're creating. Now, I don't have enough knowledge to be able to say for certain this is what's going to happen. Just based on the reading that I do and the lectures that I watch on YouTube. And for those of you that say, oh, well, YouTube may not be, I watch them on the Royal Institute channel, a lot of universities. Almost every university in the United States publishes its curriculum online. I don't know why. I think it's because so students can review the lectures that they sat in class and listened to. PBS, of course, PBS has an entire slew of YouTube channels that are just devoted to things like this. And those guys are really smart. You just gotta listen to them. They really know what they're talking about. The reason that I know what they're talking about is because I've researched their credentials. I've looked at the universities they've gone to. I've looked at what they've had to learn. Now, I disagree with most conservatives. I admire expertise. At one time, I wanted to be an expert in something. Didn't work out, but I know what it takes to become an expert because I've made the effort to become an expert. They work really hard and they really do know what they're talking about. Now, to address the people who don't believe in climate change, why this works for you, why should you say, well, yeah, why not do this? Well, for starters, you don't have to change anything, right? If all of your gas emissions are being absorbed by what's already out there, whether you believe that the gas emissions are creating climate change or not, why not? You can drive your enormous diesel pickup trucks. You can get in your car and drive 5 minutes to the store and back, rather than walking to pick up a tub of ice cream or whatever. It doesn't require you to change the way you live. That's why this works for you. That's why it's a good idea for you to say, hey, why not? Let's do this. Now, understand, the requirement is that they farm and release into the ocean. The requirement is that they farm and distribute among forests. The requirement is they plant forests. They're not selling anything. That means that they're not gaining a profit. Which means that if you leave it up to industry, industry is not going to do it. As idealistic as you want to be, there is no time, ever, when industry has made a decision without a profit motive. They have never done anything for anything other than profit. Which means that you have to make it a regulatory requirement. Making it a regulatory requirement means you have to talk to your politicians. I think this is a good idea. I think it'll work. Do I have all the details? Me personally, no. But almost all of the universities in the world do. So why not? What could it hurt? Let's do it. Get out there and talk to your politicians and tell them, I want you to do this. Or, hey, what could it hurt? It's a good idea. Let's try. I suspect, based on my understanding of the research that I have read, we can reverse it in 7 to 11 years. So we can get the environment back to a place to where it's conducive for human survival. The caveat to this, there is no time that a form of life has not negatively impacted the environment it was in. Any form of life will negatively impact its environment. It's a reality. It's a harsh reality. Like it or not. So for all of the tree huggers out there, hey, this is the way it is. So what does that statement actually mean for all of us in general? Let's just pretend we decide this is the idea we want to go with, and this is what we go with. Let's pretend that for a second. And then the environment gets better. It means we can't stop. We have to keep doing this. And then add in preventive measures. Again, a preventive measure which has expense on the production end, i.e., the polluters are paying. Right? There are two companies, three, off the top of my head. There's 3M, Millipore, Wattman. All three of these companies produce filters. They produce very, very good filters. Filters that I know for fact. And the reason that I know for fact that they can do it is because I've used these filters. They can trap carbon. They can prevent carbon from escaping into the atmosphere. So like for a university fume hood, when you're using a university fume hood, you pour your solvent into the jar is under the fume hood, and the fume hood vents it to atmosphere. So instead of venting it to atmosphere, let's vent it to a tank. And then over time, as the tank fills, we'll take the tank somewhere else, and now you have a new economic opportunity. Or it could be a company like DuPont, Dow Corning, 3M, Actifina, Exxon, Unocal, Beyond Petroleum. Any of these companies can do this. They buy those tanks from the university. Now the universities have a new revenue vehicle, a new avenue for funding. They fill those tanks, the tanks get sold to a chemical company. People who are smarter than I am about chemistry can figure out ways to break apart this combined gas, and we can do things like, say, purify the carbon out into graphite. Then we can take that graphite to other companies who turn around and make cathodes, who can in turn sell those cathodes to battery companies. And now we have a new vehicle to produce battery components. We have a new vehicle to produce precious metals. We have a new vehicle to produce fertilizer. You see how this works? It's a small idea. The people who should be paying the cost are, it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. It does cost consumers. Make no mistake about it. These companies are not going to absorb the cost. They're going to pass it on to us, the consumer. But look at the benefit. I think for the amount that they're going to raise, we have a survivable planet in a very short time compared to what we're doing now. But again, this has to be done legislatively. We have to do it through legislation. And for those that disagree with me about environment, what have you got to lose? You go this route, you don't have to change the way you live, which in reality, that's what you object to. You object to the fact that we're asking you to change the way you live. Well, here's a solution where you don't have to change the way you live. I think it's worth looking into. And again, I encourage you. No, I beg you. Read those papers on your own. If you don't understand them, there's lots of resources to dumb them down. Particularly PBS. PBS has tons of YouTube channels that can explain this in very simple terms. They're damn good at it. I think that's about all I have to say on this topic. So I'll see you guys in the next one.